So, although at Edinburgh, when I put the presentation in, I'm now the postdoctoral fellow at the University of Sheffield's Digital Humanities Institute, and I mostly focus on the digital representation of cultural heritage, and specifically how AI-enabled handwritten text recognition, sometimes called automated text recognition, when there's a bit more of a catch-all term going on. But broadly, the process of converting irregular images of handwriting or text into computer-readable data sets, and how this can be embedded as a default tool within libraries. So this presentation is transferable largely to all HTR tools, though looks mainly at Transcribus, which you might be able to see from my jumper. I've got some merch going on as well. Due to Transcribus being the largest consumer-level handwritten text recognition software with 200,000 active users, performing over 10,500 processing jobs a day, as well as the tool's basic service platform requiring no programming knowledge. So it makes for a really, really interesting case study, especially when we think about embedding it within libraries for all manner of audiences. So just a bit of background as well. Transcribus uses a convolutional neural network to build up sequential links to recognize unpredictable text, and more recently has invested in transformer models as well, which are kind of all the rage to process greater amounts of information reiteratively. So as I said, this paper presents a digital engagement framework for expanding handwritten text recognition within libraries. It's based on interviews conducted while I was on placement at the National Library of Scotland between 2022 and 2023. And it shows that HDR has clear potential in making digitized holdings of handwriting and complex print more accessible for a wide variety of audiences. So this paper should provide some insights into how this technology can also enable libraries to put traditional values of preservation, collections development, collections awareness, and research support into further practice using HTR as well. So a lot of reinvention going on to do with the conference theme, reinventing new workflows, new practices, all in light of this transformative technology. So this presentation will culminate in an adapted version of Visser and Richardson's 2013 digital engagement framework, used for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums to map their own engagement activities onto. And it shows how HTR can ameliorate the main concerns of broadening the technology toward an institutional use, not just individual curators and researchers. So by creating an understandable DEF or digital engagement framework, resulting findings can then be extrapolated to other types of content holding institutions beyond the National Library of Scotland. So I begin by offering some background to digital engagement frameworks, or DEFs, and the National Library of Scotland's current approaches to digital engagement, before outlining our methods and this eventual tailored DEF that we used for HTR, and showing how that can develop library audiences. So as Helsper and Aon said in their review of DEF's emergences, such frameworks allow for the testing of specific pathways to inclusion, accounting for social demographic factors, digital skills, and literacy, and holding subsequent potential in making complex technological workflows understandable for public audiences. Helsper and Aon continue to frame DEFs as an integrated approach to engagement, emerging from digital literacy studies, which often measured only for single skill-related factors. In addition, the use of DEFs is guided by Wolfson's 2006 call to shift research from just technical studies of systems to adapting to understand the role of these technologies in users' everyday life and interactions with libraries. So DEFs subsequently form a clear path in designing strategies, processes, and technologies to systematically engage stakeholders and maximize this co-created value that libraries and users can have when they work together, which Mia will be familiar with, considering all her work with crowdsourcing. So therefore, a dependency is developed and seen through deaths between user engagement, user need, and tool design, which relies on concrete evaluation measures for utilizing feedback in the most appropriate way. So it's with these aims and these considerations that we discuss handwritten text recognition and its relevance for developing library audiences. I've just realized that this bar is obscuring.
It's okay, we can see the slides.
That's good. Hopefully that's a little bit clearer for everyone. So just to discuss our method briefly, the NLS, or the National Library of Scotland, provides a strong case study for assessing the role of deaths in digital library engagement, which is defined by Rosman as the promotion of long-term usage of digital resources that aid information systems to operate successfully. The institution's already using handwritten text recognition and has already engaged in a lot of broader studies, including Dalglish's survey for how NLS users and staff are conceptualizing AI and similar processes. Dalglish's work, interestingly, demonstrates that actually more internal publicity as well as external is necessary for these technologies to be more widely utilized, more widely understood, and for an awareness of their capabilities in streamlining library workflows to be understood as well. So the National Library of Scotland forms a clear case study for our research, and also has a strong record of audience engagement activities. And all of this is in pursuing the library's most recent strategy, due to be changed next year, called Reaching People, which calls for outstanding digital engagement focused on enabling creative uses of collections. So lastly, the National Library also provides a fruitful case study due to its mixed history, mixed experience in terms of utilizing external agencies for audience development. So last year, activities were conducted by the Audience Agency, a contracted firm, who reached conclusions based largely on online engagement metrics, such as event attendance. And this led to some generalizations surrounding what Batavia calls idealized users, relying on tacit knowledge with user labels actually leading to some quite problematic language in reports. So families renting were described as frontline and frugal and lights and arts and culture. And generally the reception, although the intention was good, to the reports were mixed. So instead we plan with this DEF approach for an organizational approach to using handwritten text recognition that properly extends the range and nature of the National Library's public relationships by focusing on user need. This follows the work of the University of Oxford's Gardens, Libraries and Museums, which presents a more inclusive approach by drawing up pen portraits of groups' activities, motivations and needs. It's more well-rounded, it's a bit more three-dimensional. But we do appreciate that audience development is complex and often still under construction, with overarching strategies such as EDI playing a major role in reshaping current approaches. So we started this method by cataloguing extant works on user engagement within the library sector. This then informed an action research method analysing interventions into practice on a local level through participative orientated interviews of NLS staff undertaking the library's digital engagement. This was covered by the University of Edinburgh's ethics approval, and interviewees have given permission to be named in this paper as well. So together, these interviews provided a solid assessment for current National Library digital engagement, as well as future handwritten text recognition aspirations. And these staff were involved in public outreach, so they also fell in line with Wilson's call to shift from technical studies to more user-based research as well. So what did we find out? Well, we found out that handwritten text recognition coupled together with digital engagement, can form a creative and intentional way of ameliorating access issues to collections. So Shah, the current National Librarian of Scotland, stressed that handwritten text recognition holds the possibilities of opening up all different kinds and numbers of history, which can offer an opportunity for democratizing the production of historical knowledge. In turn, this enables AI literacy to grow and also AI usage to grow in curious but cautionary ways, opposed to kind of following this boosterism that we've all seen and felt as well, which was a fear from Chris Fleet, the digital map curator, following this kind of perceived need for the library to be technologically adept and keep in step and keep in pace. So in following instead this cautionary but curious model, we can adapt our digital library engagement to do with handwritten text recognition in a way that meets Gooding's call for libraries to centre their sectoral values such as transparent data creation and intellectual freedom, and these values can underpin our DEFs. This approach also breaks with previous National Library projects that have had this huge focus on numbers, which, though achieving measurable aims, such as the library's 1/3 digital strategy to have 1/3 of collections accessible in digital format by 2023, these have also proved unsustainable with growing user demand. A focus on practical handwritten text recognition usage adapted for certain collections also dismantles similar problematic notions of creating universal digital engagement within libraries. Shah continues to say, libraries, by chasing these universal standardized approaches, often go full throttle into something that we think is going to be great for the future, but then the future comes and what we have is actually not fit for purpose. So of course, these approaches that I'll show you within our DEF are reliant on resourcing and also in upskilling staff as well. But nonetheless, all the NLS staff that we interviewed saw scope for expanding links with local universities and trustworthy third parties as a way of remedying these costs and training needs when it came to utilising handwritten text recognition. So for a more kind of tailored example that's a bit more localised and situated, we conducted a lot of research to do with handwritten text recognition within our library reading rooms. And this was seen again by Shah as providing user communities the ability to advocate for collections in fresh and modern ways. So we trialled handwritten text recognition aligned scanners within our special collections reading room as part of a separate engagement with the library. The transcriber scan tent, which you can see in the bottom of the slide, specifically was seen to benefit community outreach, since the technology automatically uploads digitized materials into transcribers for further HTR processing. We performed staff drop-ins to form a base understanding of the technology and answer questions directly to the library leadership team to gain their support, which demonstrates that digital library engagement often relies on gaining senior management buy-in as well. So the current scan tent trial began in June 2023, and it's ongoing. And through this trial, we've confirmed that fears surrounding the scan tent in terms of how it would link with our self-service photography guidelines and our copyright management were not unfounded, but actually we were able to deal with them within our existing policies. So Castle's head of archives and manuscripts stated that these tents would effectively allow users to digitize on an industrial scale, flicking very quickly through pages. We've really found not so much of that activity. And if it does occur, then actually hand-holding with users and showing them how to use these technologies and onboarding has ameliorated that as well. However, the introduction of these scanners isn't without issue. Our DEF obviously attempts to respond to these and resolve them, but we considered how the scan tent would impact the spatial dynamics of our reading room as well, with McCarran, head of NLS Readers Services, wondering whether possible disruption to other users would be caused through this high-intensity scanning. This could impact the notion of libraries as meaningful third spaces, with low entry thresholds as inclusive and open. And it links to concerns that Goodnight and Gina had as well about the fact that this great focus on libraries as interactive maker spaces has neglected the importance of libraries as spaces for quiet contemplation. So further assessing how HDR relates to this is very much needed. And adopting a social model of disability as well for neurodivergent library users, we're also conscious of increased noise, and instead want to communicate effectively to empower our audiences to decide where best to situate themselves to avoid hypersensitivity and hypersensitivity. So just in the interest of time as well, we'll move finally onto the actual constructed death, which I realise is a lot of text and might seem a little bit overwhelming, but I'll pick out some specific aspects of what we eventually decided on. And I can share these slides through Hoover, and I'm sure ADHO will share them in the meantime as well. So the death maps are the roles of the NLS staff interviewed. Although it's not comprehensive, it describes several existing NLS engagement activities as assets. So on this left-hand side, right-hand side, or left-hand side for both of us. And this is due to these assets' proven success in public outreach. So it includes social media presence, public engagement such as workshops, exhibitions, and symposiums. And then this panel is corresponded to audiences in need of reaching, and using these preliminary audiences through the work done by the audience agency. The deaf includes those with additional support requirements, those who live outside Scotland's central belt of Edinburgh and Glasgow as well, which our strategies mention in terms of needing to reach. The metrics panel synthesizes these activities and approaches and departs from these number-based approaches previously mentioned, instead focusing on more user interaction within our reading rooms, brought through by the shift of these scanners. Between assets and audiences are also a set of engagement activities decided on through action research interviewing, such as the co-creation of HDR models through crowdsourcing, especially to do with Scottish Gaelic, considering we're the National Library of Scotland. This engagement panel also creates this multi-stage approach for NLS staff to expand HDR services, beginning with introductory blog posts, user onboarding, to more interactive training sessions. Reach denotes how the National Library could go about this. So again, through social media and involvement in the Read Cooperative who maintain and develop transcribers as well. So two other areas to mention very briefly, again, conscious about time, is the guidelines panel, which shows how handwritten text recognition can coincide with other internal library procedures, like the self-service photography guidelines mentioned, as well as newly constructed AI ethics frameworks that the National Library of Scotland are working on, which actually was released today on our social media as well. This cautionary but curious approach to AI. And lastly, for a more kind of general focus, we've also included a trends panel, which talks about discussions relevant to library and user engagement. So this includes crowdsourcing, post-custodial libraries, also the financial strains currently on the UK cultural heritage sector that's replicated elsewhere in the world, I know, which impacts staff training, tool development and purchasing as well. So in conclusion, although very much a work in progress, this provided digital engagement framework offers a succinct way for libraries to plan for future and ongoing handwritten text recognition work to develop their audience outreach. This is to be adapted after receiving more and more user feedback reiteratively, and obviously is very much based on institutional situated context as well. In the National Library of Scotland's case, after further clarifying our relevant user communities and resolving some of the potential issues surrounding HDR and its broader provision, such as with greater scanning. We're hoping that this depth will aid in fully harnessing the technology, supported by robust metrics and user data. So I know that's a lot of text and a lot of information, but I'll welcome any questions